Hey everyone, I want to have just a brief word about word salad, right? So, word about word salad, great. Um, this is stemming from a conversation I had last night with a viewer in the comments section of a couple of the word salad video and the bathtub video, bathtub saga, where's the recorded conversation. Uh, I know I've done separate videos on these things, but never had a rug to tie the room together, so I'm going to sort of do that with this video. Uh, Word salad has something that is, historically I've viewed it as more of a strategy or a tactic used by narcissists to manipulate people, and indeed it can be used like that. However, I think there's also a different modality that's more of an unconscious phenomenon that a cluster B personality might be totally unaware of that they're doing it. And so it's just more deeply rooted in their pathology and is a core part of who they are. And so I want to sort of break down the details of that. So in order to understand where this is coming from, let me just give a brief review of how NPD and BPD and word salad all three tie together. Okay, so all of the cluster B disorders, whether you're a borderline or a narcissist or a histrionic or an antisocial person, they all stem from bipolar disorder at its core. So bipolar, borderline, They all have borderline at their core, okay? And so the condition begins with the development of borderline personality traits. The other disorders come about as sort of these maladaptive coping mechanisms for dealing with the realities of being a borderline, okay? If you don't develop a coping strategy, well, then you're just borderline. If you cope maladaptively, you might end up being histrionic or narcissistic or antisocial, or any combination of those, which is known as cluster B disorder, not specified otherwise. So in other words, you have enough traits, like the numerical requirement to be a cluster B disorder, but they're just spread out across all the different disorders. And that means as soon as we're on the DMV, DSM, sorry, DMV. As soon as we're on like the DSM, like 7 or 8, who knows, maybe they'll get it right. But in any case, with borderline, it's one of the characteristics is that borderlines struggle, they have no internal strategies for emotional regulation. And this is usually manifested most visually whenever they have what's known as an emotional injury. So feelings get hurt, or there's something that's implied that might reflect badly on them, or maybe some doublespeak or some gossip. But it's just a general term, emotional injury. They didn't take something too well, okay? And these are all your Karens. Karens are an excellent example. Internet outrage, fake woke, those types of people. The ones that just, and it's just like they seem incapable of realizing, it's like, you know what, like this whole conversation is just stupid. Why am I even, this doesn't even affect me, right? So people who are offended on behalf of someone else is another good example. Anyways, but once they're triggered, they can't calm themselves down. And so they rely on others for emotional regulation. And these are your people who are your people pleasers and your peacemakers. The people that say, you know, I would do anything for anybody. I'd give the shirt off my back to help somebody out, you know, and I believe in helping. And, you know, the Bible says Jesus first, yourself last, others in between. That type of mentality tends to go hand in hand with borderlines. They're perfect complements to each other because you would do anything for anybody, and that's how you get your gratification. And borderlines always need somebody to help them regulate their emotions. So that's why the whole empath and narcissists are like, addictive, mutually addictive to each other. But a borderline does not have the ability to recover. And then now, this all sounds sort of simple and pathetic because we think of our emotions because we can regulate. But here's what you need to understand about people with cluster B disorders and borderline. The emotional pain they feel is very disproportionate to the cause of the injury. So it might be something very slight, but the nature of the disorder is when their feelings get hurt, it's a pain that's very like at the same level of like funeral, like losing like a loved one dying. So this is really deep, core, just permeating pain. Um, that's one of the driving characteristics of borderline disorder. And so if you have that type of trait, then it makes sense. You want to avoid getting your feelings hurt because borderlines, their feelings don't get hurt like other people's feelings get hurt. They get super, super hurt and they can't do anything about it, right? And so as they struggle uh, to process this part of their life and to integrate it, in the process of integrating this, when their feelings get hurt, when they're feeling that pain, they go into basically a full-on psychological collapse. And Dr. Craig Childress, in his book Foundations, talks about this, and it's an excellent, excellent read. So because now that they are hurting, the strategy, the priority then becomes to restore emotional peace and order, right? Which makes perfect sense, right? Somebody sneezed wrong and now you're feeling like your best friend died. You want to get rid of that feeling. You want to resolve that problem. And so this gets into emotional reasoning and outcome-based decision making, okay? Because your goal is now to feel better. That's where you're headed, okay? So you have to come to a conclusion in which you are no longer hurting. And so for borderlines, they fear abandonment, they fear rejection. So the solution for them is to, no longer feel like they're in danger of being abandoned or rejected. For narcissists, their strategy is to feel, superior, and basically through self-improvement, right? Like the from Dodgeball, the movie Dodgeball, Ben Stiller's character is a perfect example, where he grew up as an overweight kid and was always teased for, being overweight. And, he had an unhealthy relationship with food. And so he thought, to be accepted, I'm going to become a bodybuilder and a weightlifter, and I'm going to be so fit and so muscular, and I'm going to look so good that nobody would ever think anything bad of my physical appearance ever again, ever. And yeah, he has this unhealthy relationship with food and goes around sneaking pizza. It's his little guilty pleasure. And the very second that his image of being, the hard body at Globo Gym, very second that ever gets called into question, he freaks out, right? So that's, that's more along the lines of narcissism. And rightfully so, because I say rightfully so, because you have to understand their prerogative is to avoid that pain. They don't want to feel that pain. That's perfectly understandable. So when they perceive that they're about to get hurt, like they haven't gotten hurt yet, but they see that they're headed down a path where they could quickly and easily feel that pain. They see it coming. They're looking to avoid feeling that pain. Hence, that's why narcissists are quick to dump people whenever they say oh, well, once they did such blah, 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 I could see exactly where they were going, and I'm just not going to deal with that bullshit, even though somebody technically did nothing wrong, right? It's like they act like they can predict the future, and they say, you know what, I recognize that bullshit, and I'm not having it, okay? And that's a perfectly valid skill to have, but sometimes we use it preemptively and prematurely, and we come to prejudgments about people. And as a result, we end up discarding valuable people out of our lives based on what we think they might do. So now that I've said all that, the goal then is to avoid feeling that emotional injury. And and I call it a quote skill, because to a certain degree it is a skill set, not a very great one to have, but because they are now lobbying for an emotional conclusion to a situation, and the emotional conclusion being they don't feel this massive pain. Okay, Not even trying to feel good. They're trying to avoid a massive pain, and that's a very important nuance to understand. In the act of avoidance and tiptoeing around, this is why you can never get them to admit fault and never admit that they've done anything wrong, and this is why they disavow their own behavior and their own involvement in a particular event, because they're trying to avoid that massive pain. And so as a direct result, their brain starts to develop this ability to make reality and history and facts as a whole somewhat malleable. And not so much malleable, but just easily constructible, reconstructible, reconfigurable, mixable, etc. So they're like, oh shit, I could possibly get hurt here. Well, I need to come to a conclusion where I don't get hurt. So they say a bunch of stuff, right? And they do their thing. And you say, that's not correct. Well, shit, now they got to rearrange and reassemble all the facts to try and come up with an alternate combination to avoid feeling this pain. You say, well, that's not correct either, right? Because the correct combination is gonna trigger that pain, okay? And anybody who's ever lost a loved one, so just think about this for a second. If you have a loved one, like a spouse, husband, wife, brother, sister, etc., if the outcome of your conversation with somebody has, basically could result in their death, it's like, I better get this right. You would lobby really, really hard to keep that friend alive because you don't want them to die. You don't want to feel that pain, okay? So when you think about it like that, it humanizes the situation a little bit. They don't act human. They're still people. I don't care who you are. They're still people. They have a toxic pathology, okay? So just like addictions are bad, gambling is bad. Feelings are feelings, man. So they are going to, they have nothing to lose, basically, because if they admit it, they're going to feel like that huge pain. So they really have nothing to lose to try and deflect and throw out red herrings and twist words around, etc. Because they see the freight train headed straight for them. They got nothing to lose by trying to throw you off the track, right? And so that's what they're going to do. And so as a result, like I said, reality and history and facts all just kind of become real squishy to them. And this is most often, you can see this whenever they come up with these new epiphanies, like they just suddenly have this epiphany, right? That's when they've had that glitch in the Matrix. If you remember in the Matrix of the cat, and they're like, "Ooh, wow, deja vu," right? And where the Matrix has changed, when they come up with something new. And in the video of the conversation I was having with this lady, it goes around and around and around, and then she's like, and then all of a sudden she latches onto this idea that there was previous water damage and that I'm just trying to get her to pay for all this previous water damage that happened years ago. And it's like, no, that was never the case. So, but she tries to hold on to that, right? Because it's something that is just her word against mine and an effective defense for her. So that's where that comes in. So, but, history, facts, rational thoughts, logic, all of that stuff becomes squishy and recombinable, right? Here. It's like one of these dudes, for the very second, so they like, this is their peaceful state, right? And so if this cube ever gets mixed up, then, they get hurt. They have to constantly rearrange everything to stay in that peaceful existence, Something happens. Excuse me while I do this one-handed. Oh, shit. Right? Shit could get bad. And the more it gets mixed up, the more anxious they're going to get about their situation. The more they're going to try and keep things organized. Anyways, not the best single-handed example. But if you think of it like, if they're working a Rubik's Cube to prevent feeling a massive pain, and of that Rubik's Cube, that's all things like history, facts, conversations, discussions, relationships with friends, things you know, things you don't know. Nothing's off the table, because at the end of the day, they want to get back to that peaceful place. So that's where word salad is just one of the phenomenon that you observe when they're doing this. Just understand, sometimes it's a tactic, but I think certainly in the case of listening to this phone conversation, I think there's also a pathological dimension to it, and they just don't know that they're doing it. But that's what they're doing, and they're just trying to avoid some pain. So what can you do about it? You know, I mean, and I'll just leave it this. I mean, silence is golden, right? Because they're used to fighting for their right to not feel a massive pain. So they're trying that, they get used, their life is defined by fighting for their own emotional well-being to prevent these pains, right? So that they feel like they are a fighter and that they have to protect themselves, and they do. And that just sort of pervades the psychology. It's not like it's completely unrelatable. I mean, it is what it is. And so they're used to fighting. They're expecting the fight. That's what they expect. They get charged. So when you remain silent, all that energy that they're putting into it just goes nowhere. They look like Star Wars kid. Yeah. I'll just throw that one out there. And after a while they start to feel kind of silly. And they talk and they talk and they talk. When there's silence, use the silence. Let them take more rope. And let them wear themselves down. Because at the end of the day, if you know your points, you stick to your points, then there's no rush to make your points. You can either make your solid points immediately in the conversation when they're energized and feeling froggy, or you can just make your point after they've literally talked the fuck out of themselves. And whenever they can't talk anymore, then you just stick to your point and just pick right up where you left off. You have your point, you start talking, they interrupt you, put a little pin in it. This could take a minute. All right, silence. Yep, there they go again. A little more silence. There they go again. A little more silence. And they're staying silent. They're still silent. So what I was saying was blah, 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 blah. And you'll make it about as far as it takes for them to start interrupting you again. That's fine. You just wait. Because if you make your point, that you still make your point, whether you wait 40 minutes or 4 minutes. Depending on, it just depends on if you have the time. So your point's never going to change. You just stick to the point. Put a pin on it. Just be patient. Let all the salad flow. But what I was saying before you interrupted me, and when it gets to the point where they're like, this conversation has gone on long enough, be like, well, you've gone on long enough. I've been mostly quiet. And it's like I eventually tell her, it's like, I need to be able to speak in complete sentences without being interrupted so that we can have an adult conversation. If you don't let me speak in complete, coherent sentences, nothing gets resolved. So let me speak my complete sentences, and then at the end, you can say whatever it is you want to say. There's no difference. You're still going to say the same thing whether you say it now or whether you wait. So just let me say what I need to say. Then you can still say what it is you're going to say. That's how adults talk. So anyways, that's sort of where it comes from. Just don't always assume that it's an automatic tactic. And once you understand the emotional incentives for it, honestly, it becomes a lot easier to remain calm and patient. Because once you realize that this person's really just trying to avoid a hugely painful situation, you can give them some space without you yourself getting triggered and getting pulled into it. Say, okay, they're going to get this is probably going to really, really hurt them emotionally. Let them say the things that they're going to say. Let them do all the things they can to avoid it, and just be tactful, be mindful, because it is going to hurt them. It is. It's not your fault it's going to hurt them, and it's not like you're intentionally hurting them. That doesn't change the fact that they're going to get really hurt. So you can make your points. Just don't extract any joy or don't enjoyment out of watching them get hurt, because that's kind of a dick thing to do. It is. Yeah, karma's a bitch. It certainly is. But it's also kind of sort of a sad observation at the same time. So anyways, I've talked enough. Please like, comment, or share. I'd love to hear your comments, especially you, original viewer, from which this conversation originally got its genesis. So I look forward to hearing from you in the comments, and I'll see y'all on the next video.